To the panel, let me apologize to you for Mr. Stark. We may disagree on conclusions, but your credentials, lifetimes of credentials in economics, is so very impressive. And we appreciate you taking your time today to share that with this committee and therefore with Congress. And I think we're hearing a lot of draconian projections about job losses due to minor spending reductions. But those same economists got it so wrong in the stimulus. Here we are 2 years later, spending over $800 billion. We have 2.2 million fewer jobs today in America than when the stimulus began. We were told that at this point, unemployment rate would be 6.9%, off by a mile. Mark Zandi, who was cited earlier today, he predicted we would create 4 million new jobs by the end of 2010. We actually had 3 million fewer. He was off by 7 million jobs. It's time to stop listening to the economists who got it wrong and start listening to the economists who got it right. I want to pull up two charts, if I may, that follow on the testimony we heard today from our panelists. This chart follows the last 40 years in America. The blue line charts federal government spending from here in Washington. The red line charts job growth in the private sector, jobs along Main Street. As you can tell from the chart, there is no correlation between higher government spending and job growth in the private sector. In fact, for each of the 4 decades, there's a negative correlation between higher federal spending and job growth in the private sector. The next chart tracks, as again inspired by the testimony we heard today, this tracks business investment, private business investment in America the last 40 years versus job growth in the private sector. What it shows is a very strong correlation in each of the last 4 decades. When businesses large and small buy new equipment, new software, invest in new buildings, jobs along Main Street grow. And so for Dr. Lazier and Dr. Biggs specifically, I'd like your comments on the role of private investment in creating private sector jobs. And secondly, because Dr. Biggs, the Joint Economic Committee report, Spend Less, Owe Less, Grow the Economy, cited your study that our international competitors who got themselves in debt trouble and reduced their debt credibly through spending cuts, not by tax increases, were able to grow their economy in the short term as well as the long term. So I'd like both Dr. Lazier and Dr. Biggs' comments on these points.
Yes, sir. Congressman, let me start. I certainly agree that investment is a key component to both economic growth and job growth. In the short run, the chart that I showed is quite consistent with the one that you're showing now, which is that we do know that you just don't get job growth in the short run without seeing growth in economic activity. So the question is, how do we get growth in economic activity? I've never been a strong believer in the notion that the government can create a lot of economic activity. Occasionally we can move it around. I think the government has done that in the past couple of years, but I don't see a lot of effect on aggregate economic activity from the kind of government programs that we've seen. In the longer run, the more important effect of investment is actually not on the number of jobs, it's on wages. And the reason it works on wages is that wages are very closely linked to productivity growth, and in order to get productivity growth, you have to have investment. And I would include in that, by the way, investment in human capital as well as investment in physical capital.
Thank you. Well said.
Well, since Professor Lazier discussed investment, I'll try to focus on the second part of your question since time is short. The study you referenced, and obviously the literature that I reviewed in my testimony, has found that countries that attempted to get on top of their budget problems through reduced spending tend to be both more successful at cutting their deficits and debt, but also have better economic outcomes than those who try to address their budgets through increased taxes. For anybody who's doubting this, just my opinion, my testimony includes a large number of references to these findings in peer-reviewed journals that come to the same conclusions. I discussed there's a controversy among economists about to what degree fiscal consolidations will spur economic growth and help the economy. One number I cited from an IMF study found that a spending-based fiscal consolidation would produce unemployment half a percentage point lower than a tax-based fiscal consolidation 3 years after it took place. That was from a study that people cite as being a more pessimistic one in terms of these outcomes. So I can't promise you that cutting spending is going to rapidly increase growth, but given that you have to get on top of your budget, the research seems clear that going at it on the spending side seems to be more successful and better for the economy than going at it from the tax side.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Nunes is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Boucher